What I'd like to do now is shift gears. We're going to move into our, let's call it the main course, our guest presenter. And what I want to do is just start by framing this and give everybody a little bit of a context for this. James mentioned this earlier, but in the incubator phase of this project, we ran a survey. And the respondents in that survey indicated that risk management and issues related to risk management were one of the most significant barriers to running courses and running field classes. And to that end, we wanted to devote energy as a network to collectively address, collectively focus on this particular topic. And so to that end, I had the wonderful opportunity to attend the Knowles Wilderness Risk Management Conference this year in Burlington, Vermont. And while I was there, I happened to meet Steve Smith. Steve Smith is the founder of Experiential Consulting. It's a risk management firm that uniquely serves outdoor and experiential education programs in schools. He's also the author of this really good book. I'm going to do a little plug here, Beneficial Risk. Y'all should have this on your shelves. It's a great book, well written, and it covers all sorts of great topics related to this. Steve's an outdoor educator, classroom educator. He used to teach English way back when. And Steve and I have the good fortune of overlapping at the same Outward Bound base camp back in the 90s, Odin Falls on the east side of the Central Cascades. And I've really enjoyed working with Steve over these last couple of months to sort of imagine what we could do here as a network and what we provide. And so Steve was willing to share. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve and let you take it from here. And I'm stopping sharing so you can share, Steve.
I think I need the power as a co-host so that I'm able to share.
All right, who's got the power?
Give me the power. All right, I think I'm good now. So let me get that going. And I'm hoping you're seeing my risk and rewards on the river slide. Does that look okay for folks? All right. Well, Andy, thank you so much. And I'd like to thank you and the steering committee and Matthew, especially in addition to you, Andy, for spending time with me over these last few weeks, bringing this talk together for the group. And I was grateful to hear everyone's presentations. I have to admit, having gone to grad school in English and spent all those years reading thousands of student papers and writing lesson plans for English composition, I'm very jealous of the work that you all get to do. And I'm very grateful for the impact, the positive impact that you're having on education and on the river ecosystems and the world at large. So thanks in advance for all that you're doing. It's my hope that the topics we talk about today inspire you and in some ways motivate you to be able to do even more of the meaningful work that you're doing. So it's great to be here with you all. So today we're going to talk about introducing to you some current practices, some current thinking, and probably tap into some stuff that many of you already know, but also introduce hopefully some new concepts to you as well. And oh, you're seeing a split screen with the Jamboard. Why don't I just make this one bigger? How's that? Is that better? All right, we'll get to the Jamboard in a little bit. Let me make the Jamboard bigger. Okay, cool. Thanks for that. So some outcomes for today. And before we do that, let me just poll the audience. And there's a little reaction button there at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. So click on an appropriate reaction, either a like button or a thumbs up, or maybe whatever the reaction that occurs to you. If you feel that you are in a small program within a much larger institution, click on a reaction button if you've ever struggled to talk about safety and liability with your administration. How about if you've ever felt constrained and unsupported by the risk management policies and resources, or you felt afraid to ask about them? How about if you would like to feel like you don't have to keep flying under the radar at your school? I was in a small group with some folks, and they were talking about how they felt like their river programs and their research programs sort of had to be in a place where they're asking for forgiveness rather than permission, because they were kind of afraid to get too engaged with the school's risk management department. So it's really truly my hope today that if you are in any of those categories, if you clicked any reaction buttons, that for today we can hopefully inspire some new thinking, encourage engagement and ongoing connection, and motivate you to take some action to follow up on the concepts that we talk about today. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second because I want to make sure that I have the this video that I'm about to play queued up. So just a second here. Oops. I want to share sound. Okay, that's good. Okay, so let's keep going here. We're going to talk about, and we're going to use this incident on a river, this scenario, in order to stimulate some thinking and get you to just put this incident in perspective with your organizational approach to risk management. And before we do that, just some reminders about best practices with case studies here. This will look a little better. So, to maximize learning from case studies, let's remember that this incident we're about to watch is actually based on a real incident. So let's remember to be respectful and compassionate. It's probably best to avoid this mindset where you're thinking this would never happen to me, because in fact, it did happen to a school probably somewhat like yours. And a better perspective to take is to try to put yourself in the shoes of the people who are a part of this scenario and consider the many things that might have gone into this incident, and don't just leap to that simple solution of blaming the person who was closest to the incident itself. Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay. So let's take a look at this incident, this scenario. It's a little video. It's only a couple minutes long. If anyone's having any problems hearing this, or if it's not working for you, just raise your hand and I'll try to do something different. But I hope that this will play okay for you all.
A few years ago, the Geology Club from Southern Texas State University, STSU, took a trip to explore the geology of the Colorado Plateau near Moab, Utah. 6 students, the father of one of the students, and the Geology Club advisor, who was a geology professor at STSU, drove to Moab and camped at a campsite near the Colorado River in early June. On the first day that the STSU group was in camp, they watched a group of teenagers wade across the river to a sandbar. The teenagers marked the crossing location by placing a stick in the sand. The next day, the college students explored the Moab region and made chili for dinner. While the chili was simmering, several of the STSU students waded about 50 yards across the river to a sandbar. A 22-year-old community college transfer student, Zhang Wei, stayed in camp to write in his journal and keep an eye on the chili while the other students went across the river. At 4:42 p.m., Zhang's journal reads, "Wade in the Colorado River." 2 students watched as Zhang entered the river, but he wasn't in the place that the teenagers had marked with the stick. So one student, Marcy, tried to get Zhang to go further upstream for a better crossing. When they told Zhang he was not in the right spot, he responded by telling them that he didn't know how to swim. According to the Grand County Sheriff's report, Zhang was a short distance from the bank when he either lost his footing or stepped into a deep pool and struggled to stay afloat. As soon as Zhang disappeared, Marcy jumped into the river and swam to a point where she thought she would intercept Zhang, but didn't find him. The father, who was on the trip, also jumped into the river and floated for about a mile looking for Zhang. Other students in the group looked for Zhang while Marcy frantically drove a vehicle to a place where she could get cell reception and called 911.
Okay, well, obviously a really unfortunate incident, and I hope reviewing that scenario wasn't traumatizing for anyone to imagine what occurred there. What I'd like to do is take a few minutes to engage you all. We have a lot of really smart river savvy people on this call who have thought about risk management quite a bit, I'm sure. And I'd like to offer you a way for us to debrief this incident by using a Jamboard, which is something you may be quite familiar with. Are you seeing the Jamboard here on my screen? Okay, so I'm going to drop the link to the Jamboard into the chat so that you can all have that and you can join me here. Okay, click on that link in the chat if you would. And you can join me in the Jamboard. And what I'd like to do is take just a few minutes here to stimulate some thinking about the incident that we saw. A little introduction to Jamboard for those of you who haven't used it. On the left side, you'll see a little toolbar. And about the fourth item down is a sticky note. And you can click on that sticky note and add your own ideas to the Jamboard. Annoyingly, they all populate to exactly the same place. So you need to grab your sticky note and move it to an open space on the board. My guess is we'll fill this page up pretty quickly. There's a second page. And to get to the second page at the top of the Jamboard, there is a navigation toggle. You can toggle to page 2. What can we learn from an incident like this? So these are the two questions. What made this incident possible? And what can we learn from an incident like this? If you want to take, maybe let's just take like 2 minutes and invite people to populate some ideas onto the Jamboard and see where that takes us. I'll give you some space to do that. So let's go ahead and work on page 1 and page 2 of the Jamboard, if you would. And feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions at all. Lots of ideas coming in. If you see one that's similar to yours, you can put yours over there next to the other one. All right, lots of ideas coming in here. Let's look at page 2 as well. And thanks for some people who are already adding some thoughts about what we can learn from an incident like this. All right. I can see from the sticky notes that are coming in that we obviously have a crew here who are very experienced in assessing and managing risk and managing people and striking that balance between managing things safely while getting your mission accomplished and getting your project accomplished. And that's always the tension, right? We're not there just to be safe and we're not there just to get work done, but we have to do both. And so it's my hope. It's really interesting to see how some of these things cluster together. A lot of comments here about the buddy system. I'm seeing that as a theme. Lots of comments about training and risk assessment, safety talks, perception of people's ability to swim, an unfamiliar environment. Let's look at page 2 here. This is a really thoughtful comment here. I'd like to say, I have camped here myself and I did not prep my class. It could have happened to me. What a thoughtful observation, and really appreciate someone sharing that. So there's a lot of ideas here. We're not going to dive into every sticky note, but it's my hope that that incident sets the stage pretty nicely for some of the stuff that we are about to dive into. So feel free to keep playing with the Jamboard. And you might note there's also a page 3 and a page 4 that we're going to get to. Page 3 is a place where you can capture any kind of questions or feedback, as we go through the talk, and we'll make sure that we come back to that. And at the end, there is a question about if you felt inspired, encouraged, or motivated by this talk in any way. So feel free to interact with the Jamboard as we're going through the rest of the slides here. Whoops, come back, Jamboard. And I'm going to go back to my presentation, which I hope that you are now seeing on the screen. Thanks for doing that. Interesting to start with a real life scenario that actually happened not too long ago. And I'd like to thank Angie Moline, who some of you may know, for making that beautiful risk management video for us. So let's start with the big picture here. And before we can talk about safety and risk management, maybe it's a good idea to define some terms. So we're going to define safety, we're going to define risk, and we're going to talk about the connections, the very important connections between physical and emotional risk. So I'd like to offer you a definition of safety. And safety is a term that we all use, and everyone kind of thinks they know what it means. But my guess is, in my experience, we do not all have a shared definition for what that means. And we do not all, as the small group discussion, I think, began to show, your definition of safety and what's appropriate might be very different than what your organization expects or the tools that they provide you with, right? So if you look safety up in the dictionary, you will find something similar to this: freedom from risk of harm. And I am genuinely curious, thinking about the rivers that you work on and the projects that you do, can we ever say that we are free from risk of harm doing that work? Is safety really the term that we should be using? It's this binary term. It's this yes or no thing. People come back from the trip, were they safe? Yes or no. And we tend to think of it in these very binary and simple terms. And I find it much more useful and interesting, in fact, to not so much focus on safety, which is this yes or no question, but to engage with the concept of risk. And to me, and this is a definition from the book that Andy mentioned, risk is not just a bad thing. It is not something bad that we are trying to eliminate from our programs and from our experiences. Risk is uncertainty. It is uncertainty, and it has the potential for either loss or gain, as shown by the woman playing Jenga here, right? She has a chance to lose something or gain something by taking that risk. And the book that Andy mentioned has a title of Beneficial Risks, which is based on the belief that there are benefits to taking risks, and that we should not just be managing risk, but we should be optimizing risk and getting the positive parts out of the risk while managing the undesired parts. So I'd like to maybe encourage you, when thinking about how to talk about this stuff with your leadership and with your administration and with your organization, not just to settle for the simplistic word concept of safety, but to really talk more specifically about risk and how you manage it. So last but certainly not least, a lot of the examples and the drowning example that we showed, a lot of risk management, a lot of safety focuses on preventing medical and physical injuries and harm. And I would like to say that while that is obviously very important, that there is another whole facet, which is the emotional safety piece. And not every program is going to have a drowning or a broken leg or a car accident, but everyone is going to have participants and staff that have mental health considerations, that might have anxiety, that might have depression, that might have homesickness, that might have any number of pre-existing conditions that they bring with them that, to me, have just as much of an effect on the physical safety of the group as they do on the emotional safety of the group. So is there a connection between physical and emotional risk? And the answer is that safety science says absolutely. Increasingly, and Andy mentioned the Wilderness Risk Management Conference where we met, Organizations like that, more and more, are spending time not just focusing on physical safety, but recognizing the importance of emotional safety. And it's just as important to have a plan and an assessment of that and how to manage that as it is to have life jackets in your boat. So just to highlight that, anyone who has studied avalanche education, raise your hand or hit a reaction button if you've ever studied avalanche education before, knows that avalanche education, when I first started doing it back in the day, would focus on the science of the avalanche itself and the facets and the crystals and the angle of the slope. Now, more and more and more, they focus on the group dynamics and the communication between the individuals and making sure that everyone's voice is heard. And we have found that that goes a lot further, that emotional safety piece affects the physical safety piece. And we see this in airline pilot management and lots of other industries. Surgery, we see lots of examples where having a psychologically safe team can create physical safety for the participants. So, indicators of emotional safety on one of your trips could include some examples like trust, like transparency between people, ability to speak up and voice your concerns. If your participants, or if you don't feel safe raising your concerns or talking about a near miss that happened, or saying that I made a mistake and I want us all to learn from it, how are you going to be physically safe in that setting? Or how might that affect your physical safety, right? Teamwork is usually a pretty good indicator of emotional safety. Vulnerability, someone added a sticky note on the page earlier about having camped at that same place and how this incident could have potentially happened to them. To me, that's a wonderful example of vulnerability. And that is an indicator of emotional safety and trust. So feel free to pop into the chat if you have some examples of what emotional safety looks like for you, or some things that you do to try to create an emotionally safe environment on your program. I would be very curious to see what those things are. So please feel free to populate those thoughts into the chat and share those with each other. So another little nuance here, as long as we're thinking about this big picture where we're going today, you've probably seen some version of this slide before, and it's the idea of finding a sweet spot between challenge and skills and support. And students who are challenged and they don't have the skills or the support end up in this panic zone, right? And people who have very little challenge in the program or in the experience, and they have lots of skills and previous experience, end up bored and they're just too much in their comfort zone, right? But this sweet spot of being in the learning zone is, to me, very connected to the concepts that we're talking about with physical and emotional safety, and to create a space where people can be in their learning zone, can be appropriately challenged, but supported with skills that you provide and resources and support and supervision, whatever the systems might be that help them be in that learning zone while managing the safety of the experience itself. So I'd like to think, I think Matthew suggested that I add this slide in here, and I think that really nicely connects to some of the larger points of the talk today. So we're going to do a comparison between two different schools of thought. And one of them is going to be very familiar to you because it is what your university or school is probably already doing and what society at large tends to do. And I'm going to introduce, that's safety one, a traditional top-down approach to safety. I'm also going to introduce to you an emerging, increasingly popular, and to me, very common sense school of safety management called Safety 2 that builds on Safety 1. It's not like there's one or the other. We have to learn how to do both. And I just attended a conference all last week in Florida that was all about Safety 2. And it had folks from all around the world that had come together from different industries to share how they're doing this in their organizations. So it's kind of a fresh time for me to be chatting about this with you all. So let's do this quick comparison between Safety 1 and Safety 2. So safety one is a traditional approach to safety. This is going to sound familiar. In this mindset, safety is an accountability that you have, or workers in the front line have, up to the management itself. You are responsible for keeping yourself safe. People are a problem that we are trying to manage in this mindset. So we manage them with rules and regulations and training and compliance and punishment when they don't do the right thing. And we blame them when things go wrong. In order to manage safety in this mindset, we need to tell people what they need to do to be safe. We believe in this mindset that safety means the absence of accidents and injuries. No accidents. That means that we are safe. And thereby, we should really focus on what has gone wrong. We should study the pieces that have gone wrong. Let's find the broken components and fix them in our heroic and aspirational quest for zero incidents. So raise your hand if you think it's possible to run a program indefinitely and have zero incidents, or raise your hand if you've ever worked at a program that operated for an entire year and had zero incidents or near misses, right? So it's clearly this aspirational concept, this grail that we can chase. This sign embodies a lot of the concepts of safety one. I'm sure that you have a sign just like this, probably somewhere on your campus or in your physical plan or the warehouse. And the sign is well intended, right? This sign is attempting to encourage people to, not have accidents. And they're trying to set this positive goal to show people, how many days has it been since we had a reportable or recordable incident? I would ask you to pause for a moment and ask yourself, is this sign accomplishing what it sets out to do? What might be some downsides to this approach? I see Flora, you're smiling. Tell me what you're thinking about.
Well, it's intimidating, right? Because then if somebody has had an accident, they're not going to want to report it when this sign is there.
Who wants to be the one? It says right here, safety starts with me. I need to stop and think and be mindful. So if something goes wrong, clearly I wasn't being mindful. I wasn't doing my job. I'm the guy that's going to reset this back to zero and maybe cost my team the bonus pizza party at the end of the month or whatever, reward they get. So there is a problem with this whole mindset of chasing zero incidents and blaming people for when things have gone wrong. Thanks, Flora, for letting me put you on the spot like that. So if that is safety one, let's contrast that with this emerging school of thought that I think you may find to be a little more uplifting. And it's what they are calling safety two, or some are calling safety differently. So these are the red words from the previous slide. We're going to see them change one by one. So rather than accountability, safety being an accountability up to the boss, here, safety is an ethical responsibility that we have down to the participants. Instead of seeing people as the problem, we see people as solutions to your safety problems with all of their critical thinking and their adaptability and their graceful extensibility of their capacities, right? Instead of telling people what to do, we ask people what they need. What do you need to run your river program safely? If rather than seeing safety as the absence of something, injuries and accidents, instead we can recognize safety as the presence of something. In this case, positive capacities, organizational behaviors that help to make us safer, and resilience. Instead of just looking at the pieces that have gone wrong, we can actually study, for the most part, why do things go right? Why do most of your trips come back with all the people that you left with? And for the most part, having met your outcomes for that trip, do we know why? Do you look at those, or do we just study the cases that have gone wrong? And instead of this quest for zero incidents, instead we can replace that altogether with this desire and a pursuit of learning and improvement from the incidents and the near misses, and seeing them as positive chances to make progress. So this image here fairly nicely encapsulates the difference between safety 1 and safety 2. If this bell curve shows the entirety of all of the river programs that go out in a year, for the most part, things go right. They meet your outcomes, things go well. We don't necessarily study why, but for the most part, things go right. Safety 1 only looks at that little red part in the bottom left-hand corner there, the pieces that have gone wrong, the injuries, the broken pieces. And it tries to understand safety by looking at the pieces that were not safe. Safety 2 invites us to expand the scope of things that we look at and ask ourselves why things normally go right so that we can do more of that. We can't understand marriage by only studying cases that have ended in divorce. And we can't manage safety by only looking at the pieces that have gone wrong or the pieces that were not safe. So another way of kind of thinking about this, and thanks to Andy for kind of reframing it this way, rather than just thinking about the risk of what you're losing, we could also look at the opportunity for the rewards from the programs that we're designing, and making sure that we are pursuing what I call the beneficial risks of these programs, not just avoiding the bad stuff, but actively designing the programs to identify and structure an approach to get the most reward from the risk that we are taking. So a caveat, I've just pitted these two things against each other to make a point. In fact, safety 1, we wouldn't be here without safety 1. Safety 1 has gotten us to a certain point, and in order to move on from there to get better, this is where starting to think about safety 2 is going to help us. So just to be fair to the old traditional standby, it's not like all that stuff is bad. It's that we need to do that, and we need to think about the bigger picture. So I hope that makes sense. So some thoughts on doing safety differently. Okay, Steve, thanks for all these theories and these philosophical concepts, but what in the world do we actually do with this? What are some concrete things that we can do to move forward? So the first one I would suggest is after every trip, after every program gets safely back to camp or to the parking lot or to your campus, you should ask this question: were we lucky or were we good? And it's nice to see some people kind of smiling and nodding their head at that question. Maybe you're already doing some version of that. Here's a nice example of a guy, and I would ask, was he lucky or was he good today? It sounds like he was lucky and he's about to be unlucky because he's not critically examining the workplace context and understanding why that first falling box missed him, right? So were we lucky or were we good today is a question you can all just start integrating right away. Understand and pursue those organizational behaviors that make your program safe and successful. If you don't feel emotionally safe, if you don't feel like you can speak up and raise concerns when you have them, if you don't feel like you can report an incident or a near miss because you're afraid you're going to get blamed, then you are missing some of those organizational behaviors that are going to make your program safe and successful. Debriefing and learning all the time, not just when things have gone wrong, right? When incidents occur, really seeking to learn from them and not to just pin blame on an individual. It is so easy to blame a person for something that might be a system-driven issue to begin with. And I would suggest in that drowning case that we looked at, it's really easy to just blame the people there without looking at the bigger picture. And some of you started to populate some very good sticky note examples of organizational things that might have helped to prevent that incident from happening. At the same time, don't assume that more policies automatically make us safer. It's the easiest thing in the world to say, oh, we had an injury last week with a student cutting onions around the campfire. Now we have a policy that says we will no longer allow onions on our programs. And it is really easy to just layer policies as a reaction to an incident. And it's usually done from that safety 1 mindset that people are the problem that we're trying to control. And I would ask, do we really need a policy here? Or maybe you have a policy or something already in place that's making this incident possible to begin with. So don't just assume that more makes us safer. Involving the frontline staff in your safety management, if you do have an incident, if you do have a near miss, involving those people in the analysis and the solution going forward is going to do a lot more for you than having those rules or those solutions come from the top down, possibly from folks that don't even understand the context in which you're running your trip. Focusing on emotional safety as a precursor to physical safety, as we discussed, and recognizing that both are really important. Thinking when, not if, incidents occur. It's really easy to kind of like lull yourself into this mindset that, yeah, we've identified all the hazards and checked the boxes and we're good to go. But I would suggest that you really reframe that and think about, here's a question. Whoops, let's go back to that. Here's a question for you. If you were to anticipate your next most likely incident, what would that be? And are you prepared to respond to it? Rather than answering that question on this call, have that conversation with your team proactively before you get into the heart of the next round of programs that you're running, so that you've had a chance to think through that, think through your response, maybe prevent it from happening, be better equipped to respond if it does happen. So think when, not if, incidents occur is the essence of that. So those are some really practical, specific actions that I would suggest that we can all take. And I want to leave, I don't know, we're kind of near the end of our scheduled time, Andy, so I'm not sure how much time you want to allot for questions and discussion, but I'm happy to take them for whatever amount of time you feel like we can spare.
Maybe, yeah, why don't you take a couple minutes? There's obviously lots we could talk about. So why don't we take, what do we got? 3:03, why don't we go to 3:06 or 7 and see how everyone's doing?
Wonderful.
Thanks everybody for hanging in there. Steve, that was fantastic. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate a little bit of extra time here. I'm looking at the Jamboard and I'm seeing a couple questions on page 3. How do you decide when a policy needs to be changed and when it doesn't? Some are obvious, some aren't. I would say that, the more you can involve that frontline staff and let them be a part of figuring that out and looking deeper than just blaming an individual, but also looking more upstream at all of the systems, things that might have contributed to the incident, that's where that question, what you would find the best answers to that. Here's another sticky note on page 3. Psychological dimensions of risk are definitely worth discussing, especially the halo effect. Thank you for that. If you don't know about the halo effect, Google that. It's sort of like perceiving your leader of a program to have more credibility or decision-making power than they really should. It can be prevalent on trips with older, more experienced mentors. Excellent comment. Yeah, so learning about those cognitive biases and some of the group dynamics that can stack the deck and make us more likely to have a incident is a really powerful plan. What do you recommend we do as a river network to improve safety? Andy, I think you're gonna talk a little bit about that in kind of the wrap up and some of the next pieces, but definitely learning about this safety 2 concept, I think would go a long way, because my guess is you've already got a lot of safety 1 in your program and thinking about the safety 2 piece. I need to educate my administration and risk management folks, not fight with them. Absolutely. Yeah. Like inviting them to the Wilderness Risk Management Conference, for example, might be a really good thing to do. If you feel inspired, encouraged, or motivated in any way by this talk, I would suggest popping some of those ideas onto this 4th page of the Jamboard, and maybe that would be a nice way for us to kind of debrief some things. It was my hope for today that we are inspired, that you are encouraged, that you are motivated to take some action and build on some of this common language that we developed here today. And it'd be great if you maybe, as the call's wrapping up and after you sign off, just to populate some of those thoughts under that last page of the Jamboard. We can save that and send that back around to you all. There's a copy of my book. It's called Beneficial Risks. It's available on my website, which is there on the screen, outdoorrisk.com. And I would be honored to, chat with you on LinkedIn if you want to connect there, or send me an email with follow-up questions or comments about any of the stuff that we talked about today. I think you're doing incredibly meaningful, important, and hopefully fun work outdoors. And the cool thing about this Safety 2 approach is it focuses on those pieces. It focuses on the work you're doing. It focuses on your reasons for being there. Focusing on positive pieces is a lot more fun than just looking at the parts that have gone wrong. And there's a whole slew of researchers and publications that are supporting the validity and the efficacy of a Safety 2 approach. And I would encourage you to keep learning about that. So thanks so much for having me here today. And I wish we had more time to chat about all this, but please reach out to me if you'd like to continue the conversation. I'm going to stop sharing right there.